What's good, everybody? Welcome to WinCity Sports on the WePodcast site and app. This is Windsor's only local sport podcast with your host, as always, Drake Demore. Here on WinCity Sports, we like to run down all sorts of local sport news and talk to our local athletes and coaches. Later on in the show, we're going to be talking about our Windsor Spitfires, Windsor Express, among other news, but first we have to get to our interview this week. It's Stone Rockwell from Border City Wrestling. He's a professional wrestling superstar. We're going to be talking all about his career, where he's from, how he got into wrestling, the first show he ever went to, his past characters in the professional wrestling business, and much, much more. Obviously, we'll be talking about Border City Wrestling and Destiny Wrestling up in Toronto, where he's from, and just kind of talk wrestling in general. But first, before we get to that, we have to do what we always do here on WinCity Sports and talk about our Windsor Lancers Athletes of the Week. This week, coming from our women's volleyball team, it's Lexi Pollard, and from the cross-country team, Sean Master. Lexi had an outstanding weekend for the Lancers women's volleyball team over 2 games against McMaster and Brock. The second-year outside hitter had 23 kills and only 6 errors on 61 attempts to hit a .300 for the weekend. She also had a career-high 3 aces and 2 blocks. On the other hand, Sean had an outstanding showing at the U Sports Cross Country Championships this past weekend in Victoria, BC. The 5th-year senior placed 11th overall, finishing the 10K course in a time of 31 minutes and 48 seconds. So now we're going to get right into the interview with Border City Wrestling's Stone Rockwell. So like I said, first off, thanks for joining me. And we just kind of want to do a little background on yourself before we start breaking down other things like BCW and Toronto wrestling and whatnot. So obviously, leading up to this, I did a little research on yourself. And no offense, but I was kind of surprised to see how long you've been wrestling. I didn't realize you've been around for so long, since about 2001, 2002, because mostly familiar with you through BCW. So how and when did you kind of break into the wrestling business?
I actually started training in 2001 with Ron Hutchison in Toronto. And Ron Hutchison, if you're unfamiliar with him, has trained Edge and Christian and Trish Stratus and Gail Kim and whole bunch of other people, big list of, people who have been somewhere and done a few things and stuff like that. So I started there in about 2000, and I had my first match in 2001. And then, kind of just took off from there.
So why? Like, were you always a fan growing up, or what's the story behind that?
I wasn't a fan. I was a definite late bloomer, and late bloomer I mean by the time I was about 10 or so. My father somehow got tickets to WrestleMania 6 in Toronto. I knew absolutely nothing about wrestling at that point, but it was a really big deal for WrestleMania to come to Toronto. And well, back then, definitely too. And I didn't really know about it. It was like casual at best, never really caught my eye. But from WrestleMania 6, I kind of was reading in the newspapers and looking at what this thing was that I was going to go see, and I automatically was drawn to the Ultimate Warrior, because before that I was nothing but comics and superheroes, Batman and Superman and Ninja Turtles and G.I. Joe and all kinds of things like that. So the Ultimate Warrior was like a natural kind of draw for me, because he just, he looked like those type of guys that I idolized in comic books. He looked like a comic book character in real life.
Mm-hmm. Especially back then, but even still now, they kind of parallel each other, I guess, kind of complement each other, right? They're both characters, battling, fighting.
Absolutely, yeah. Then the whole storylines from there just kind of got me, I was kind of bragging at school, like, I'm going to WrestleMania 6 and blah, blah, blah. So I actually started getting into it and following it, and then it took like a major obsession in the 90s for me.
Because WrestleMania 6 would have been when exactly? That would have been like early 90s, right?
I think it was 91.
Yeah.
So I was about, like I said, 10 or 11 years old. And that it took a hold of me at that age, and I started renting the videos, even like all the back, going backwards from there, and just keeping up with Ultimate Warrior. And then my next, for whatever reason, gravitated to Bret Hart around the time of his Intercontinental Championships and then heavyweight titles and all that stuff, and kind of grew from there.
Mm-hmm. he was
just snowballed and snowballed.
Yeah. And Brett was an inspiration to a lot of kids back then. Everyone loved Brett back in that day. But it's kind of funny that you mentioned that because if I'm not mistaken, you said you trained by Ron Hutchinson or you trained Edge, and I'm pretty sure that's the WrestleMania, if you've ever seen it. They have footage of Edge in the crowd watching.
Yeah.
And then you were there, trained the same people. That's just kind of cool.
Yeah, I'm sure there was probably a bunch of Ron students in the crowd at that moment. At that time, in that era when it was known as the Sky Dome.
Yep.
And it's pretty funny how they all kind of come together after that.
Mm-hmm. Well, especially back then, and just being in that area, it's such a huge area. But if he is so well respected, then everyone's going to be kind of gravitating towards him, right?
Oh, definitely.
So.
At that time, like I said, in the late '90s, early 2000s, as far as I knew. Because again, before I started training, I knew nothing about independent wrestling. He was the only place to go. In fact, the places that grew from the areas where you can train now, I believe in Toronto, there's a few schools. They all spawned from people that were trained by Ron Hutchinson.
Yeah, he has quite the credentials, to say the least.
Yeah, they kind of splintered off from there. There was. There's probably 3 or 4 schools in the Toronto area, and they all have lineage to, being someone who started it being trained by Ron.
Mm-hmm. Cool. I never knew that. Like I said, I just am mostly familiar with you from BCW, so it's crazy to see the connections because, like you said, he has quite the credentials and just well respected. So that's awesome to hear, man. So upon training, what were some of the first promotions that you wrestled for? Did you wrestle for Ron or what?
I think part of the reason why, that you being from Windsor and stuff and didn't really know me at all was because I was very, very much a weekend warrior at best for the first, I'd say, 6-7 years of my wrestling, mostly due to me being shy and actually not really thinking much of myself or much of my abilities in the ring. I just was kind of I just knew I loved it and wanted to try it, but I didn't think I'd ever be good at it or able to do it. So I didn't really take it that seriously. And if you look at any kind of pictures or matches of me back then, I was decent mechanically, but I looked terrible, and I definitely wasn't taking all the steps that I needed to go somewhere. So and the other part was Ron actually didn't let anybody wrestle anywhere else. So for the first 3 or 4 years, I only wrestled for him maybe twice a month at best, and so that limited you as well. We did the CNE every year, which was great because you could get 2 to 3 matches a day for the 2 weeks that it was running. But other than that, it was once a month. Maybe he'd do once a month in Toronto and then a spot show maybe in like Brantford or something like that. Mm-hmm. But I didn't really get a lot of reps in early on, so it really took me a long time to get some wheels under me.
Interesting. I mean, everyone has a different story, right? And I've been around BCW for so long. You see that there's people that, like you said, just kind of try it and just do it. You know what I mean? It's not like it's their main thing in life, but hey, man, like if you're willing to do it and if you're good at it, then I respect anyone that is willing to do that. So
yeah, cool. I think it was different for me because also part of what happened too when I was training Ron kind of disappeared after he trained us. He was in the middle of teaching another group of people and kind of just like canceled everything and disappeared for years. Just kind of was done with wrestling, and that really kind of left myself and the few people that were trained kind of in a lurch. Like we didn't know what to do or where to go. We had no connections, nobody looking out for us. We really, really had to find our own way. There was nobody who's like, hey, get in the car, kid. I'll show you this. I'll show you that. I'll take you here. There was none of that stuff. So, really kind of had to pick everything up on my own, pretty much.
Mm-hmm. that's different. That's totally different from a lot of stories that I've at least heard and, seen on TV and stuff. So
yeah, mine. You'll have to forgive me. Mine is going to sound kind of depressing, but it really is.
Hey, but
it's just like looking back now, I just realize I see how things are and how other people are treated and how I'd like to treat people, and I realize how I had it, and I was like, oh well, that probably I could have benefited from someone kind of. Hey, work here, don't work there. Come with me in the car here, do this. So that never happened with me. And my trainer disappearing didn't help, and me not having any confidence. Like I started when I was 21, but I didn't really get into anything until I get really any kind of traction until maybe 25, 26.
Mm-hmm. It's cool to hear, man. Like you said, you kind of see other people and what they're going through, and sometimes not just wrestling. I'm not talking wrestling, but sometimes people are bitter to give back or whatever, because like if they had a negative experience, you know what I'm saying. But yeah, it's cool to hear. And hey, man, like you said, it's kind of depressing. It would be depressing if you like gave up and never continued forward. Then it would be kind of sad. But it's not, because that's not what happened, right?
No, not at all. And I think I actually treat if someone's got if someone was taking wrestling seriously and is a nice person, I've got all the time in the world for them to help them out. And if they can hop in the car with me, if I can get them a booking somewhere or do something, like I'll definitely. In fact, I just got off the phone with someone now. I'm training students at Santino Morella's gym in Mississauga, Battle Arts. And there's a couple of students that I like and want to learn and have some potential. And I'm doing a show next week, and I just got them some spots, so they're going to come with me across the border and do some shows and things like that. So it's all the stuff that I never got. So I want to actually, because I didn't get it, I want to help as many people as I can. Not everybody wants my help, or I don't really necessarily want to help everybody, because some people they just rub you the wrong way, or you can tell they're a little bit arrogant. But those humble guys that want to learn and are just genuine, like, good dudes, then I have no problem helping those people.
That's really awesome to hear, man, and like that's what it's all about, So.
Yeah,
pretty
definitely.
Cool. That's pretty cool. And what's kind of jump ahead, because we'll skip over BCW and talk about Destiny and coaching, really, because those were kind of the last things that I want to talk about. Since you're a seasoned vet, you've been around for 15 years, and I didn't know if maybe you coaching and training others might be an option for you in the near future, in the far future, and it seems like you're already kind of doing that, right?
Yeah, I'm kind of I'm just getting my feet wet. I don't know if I ever want to get into a whole training mode and have like a class and whatever. I basically do a fundamentals class on the weekend, my schedule permitting, for the Battle Arts students. They already have 2 or 3 days a week there of pro wrestling, where they do grappling with one coach, and then they do some other kinds of training. But mine is just getting in the ring and bumping and moving around and some psychology and things like that. Just some of the basics that they might not be picking up elsewhere. I kind of help them out with that. I'm actually really enjoying it. And right now it's working out and it fits my schedule, and I actually do enjoy helping them out and things like that. So I don't know if I'm ever. I've always said to myself that I always want to be a wrestler and focus on that. I don't know if I ever want to move on to that kind of coaching and training and things like that, because it's a big commitment, and I'm already actually an elementary school teacher, so I've got my kind of fill of helping younger people. So I don't know, like, I'm good with just wrestling now and helping when I can, and like I said, bringing people to shows when I can and things like that.
That's awesome, man. And like you said, the teacher thing. First off, what's with wrestlers being teachers, man? There's Cody Deaner is a teacher. I talked to him. Is he not a teacher? I think he is a teacher.
Was. Yeah.
Yeah,
he is or was. I know
so many of them. What's up with that?
I honestly, I can't tell you. I know it fits. It's great for the schedule, with the summers off and some breaks and things like that. But I came from a family that they didn't. They weren't really that into me being a ref. I was a fan. It was just kind of my thing. You know how people have those stories of like they watched it with their grandmother, or they watched it with their father, or anything like that. Nobody in my family had any interest in it, so it was always just mine. It was always my thing, and they always made sure if I'm gonna wrestle and do this, that I need to make sure that I have something else that I can do in some other profession, so I don't just kind of let those early 20s, mid 20s go by, and all of a sudden I have to maybe go back to school, or wrestling's not working out, or I have to find a career and things like that. So I was pretty lucky to be able to do both, and really enjoy teaching. I love being a teacher, and I love wrestling as well. So I'm happy kind of doing both right now.
Yeah. And having the backup that's very smart, obviously.
So. Yeah, it's always good. It's not even my backup. It's just kind of there with me at the. It's
I mean, like when you're starting out, right? You're like.
Yeah, when I'm starting out, I was in university, and then just kind of hitting the road on the weekends, trying to do shows, things like that. Cool. Another reason why I didn't maybe fully take it as seriously as I could have in my early 20s. It took me, till about 25, 26 to establish that teaching career and get going there. And
you're a different person back then anyway, right? Like, you
definitely
grow up and you learn.
Yeah.
And you make better decisions, hopefully. Let's talk a little bit about Destiny, though, before we move on to BCW. So do you have a good working relationship with Santino, and what's it like down there at those shows? I've personally never seen one, but man, they bring in some pretty good names, and looks like they run great shows. Scott actually has talked it up awesomely too. He even said the Battle Arts shows that they do are in a great venue.
Yeah, the venue, the Don Koloff Arena, is what it's called when we train in there. It's an amazing facility. Again, it's one of those things that everybody that goes there should be very fortunate that they get to. They have that kind of a ring and a facility. They can work out. They can add elements to their game. Like they can learn some mixed martial arts. They can box. They can wrestle. They can do all sorts of things all in one place. And it turns into actually a nice little venue that can, hold 500-600 people when they bring in a show. And Destiny is one of those companies that takes advantage of that building. And it sounds great. It looks great. The fans are awesome. And the promoter brings in some great talent and has big houses because of it. Kevin Nash, Booker T, things like that. I believe this show this weekend, Sunday after Windsor, is Pete Dunne and John Morrison.
Yes,
is the main event.
That's right.
So
I remember seeing that.
That's I want to say it's sold out actually.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a pretty high caliber match. So.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those kind of first things, and again, it's such a different time too. Like that's such an interesting main event. A guy that's kind of like an active WWE wrestler, and John Morrison, who's kind of been all over the place. And back when I was on the doing indies when I was younger, like you're lucky if the main event was like King Kong Bundy just squashing some local guy. Yeah, it's just so different now.
That's awesome, man. So let's talk about BCW before we really wrap it up. It's going to be the bulk of our talk here. So you came to BCW 2 years ago? Started working as Stone Rockwell.
I've actually wrestled for BCW off and on for years. Scott might not remember. We joke about this now, but I have before Stone Rockwell. I'd always been a character, a wrestler named Asylum, who was kind of just like a typical indie wrestling bad guy, bad-tempered type of thing. And I had a tag team partner, and we were known as the Flatliners. And actually, that was one of the ways that I kind of got noticed by a few companies. We did some stuff very early on at Impact Wrestling, and we did some stuff for Ring of Honor and things like that. So I would wrestle off and on for Scott, but we never really got to be like kind of any kind of mainstay or anything like that. And then I think BCW kind of disappeared for a little bit.
Yeah.
And then yeah, he started coming back and showing up at Destiny, and we started talking. And I was doing the Stone Rockwell character by then, and he took a liking to, I guess, me and the character, and I've been working for him at his shows ever since.
Awesome, man. And like when you were talking earlier about the appeal to like the Ultimate Warrior and the comic book things, what do you think the first thing I thought of? Stone Rockwell, like that. Yeah, you can tell that's Rockwell. You, that's your creation, and that's just wicked, man. That's a great character.
I'd like to think, as far as I know, that is the first action adventure. Well, when I say in my promos that Stone Rockwell is pro wrestling's first action adventure superstar, I really do think that's the case. I don't know if there's ever been anything even remotely close to a character like that, who's kind of like an adventurer, explorer, Indiana Jones type thing, with the hat and the whip and stuff. So I'm actually quite proud of the fact that it's in wrestling. It's very difficult to say that something is original, and I think it's great that I get to say that with Stone Rockwell.
So what do you think about the BCW diehard crowd that they've built over the last 20 years? What is it like working in front of them?
With the character like Stone Rockwell, they were awesome from the beginning. They understood the character. They kind of laughed along with me when they needed to, and everything was working out really great. They're very knowledgeable fans. They but they don't just sit on their hands. They actually appreciate when you're working hard and when you're actually clever and you kind of do some creative things. They do really enjoy it, and I think this weekend at BCW Excellence, I think, is going to be like a prime example of that. This is a really, really big show, and I'm just I'm happy that I get to showcase in some way my abilities there on that stage.
BCW gives us the opportunity to work with some big names. I say quote unquote big names because most recently, the last BCW show, at least at St. Clair College, you got to work with Hornswoggle. What was it like working with him and having that tag team match against the fraternity?
I thought that was a lot of fun. Swoggle's a great guy. We did some great vignette stuff in the back together. We have a great chemistry together. For some reason, Stone Rockwell and a Leprechaun go really well. Go really well together. And the fraternity was a great pairing for us, and the crowd was great. The electricity, the venue, everything looked and felt great. So it was a lot of fun.
I just didn't know like what they were gonna do with him and how it was gonna come across. And that match was a lot of fun. I remember just even in the ring, you guys had a lot of good little bits that you did.
Yeah, it was definitely a lot of fun. Stone Rockwell allows me to have a lot of fun.
Absolutely, man. It's a very colorful character, and you can do a lot of those fun things, right? So,
yeah, for sure.
Just to kind of wrap it up, because we kind of jumped all over the place, but the future of BCW, I mean, like I said, they have a lot of agreements with NOAH and GFW and whatnot. The list goes on. And where do you see BCW going, and what do you look to do with them in the future?
I think that if you are a wrestler in Ontario, definitely, I don't think there's a better place that you could work with Scott's production and the people he knows and his connections with, like you said, like with GFW and with NOAH and things like that. You'd be a fool not to try and get yourself involved in that in some way. So I think just kind of showing that Stone Rockwell is different and can stand out, not only in the ring, but outside the ring on the mic as well, is definitely something that I just hope to keep sticking out there in front of the right people and then just see what happens.
Okay, welcome back to WinCity Sports, and thank you to Stone Rockwell for taking the time to do that interview with me and talking some pro wrestling. We'll be talking some more wrestling in a little bit. But first, to kick off our news portion of the show, we're going to start with our Windsor Spitfires and some hockey news. Actually starting off with the CIBC Super Series, which pits the CHL's best versus Russia's best. Windsor Spitfires' Michael DiPietro was representing Team OHL, who picked up a 4-2 win this past weekend. Mikey was also with the Spitfires, as they split a pair of games with Logan Stanley and the Kitchener Rangers, losing Friday night at the odd 4-3, and then picking up a win in OT at the WSU Center this past Saturday. The Spits had what seemed to be a heavy lead going into the third, but allowed goals to help the Rangers push OT. With just 11 seconds left, when it looked like a shootout was approaching, Aaron Luchuk found Luke Boca out front for the game winner. The Spits will now play the London Knights this Saturday at home at the WSU Center. And again, speaking of pro wrestling, Border City Wrestling is going to be holding Motown Showdown at the Diamondback Saloon on December 3rd in Belleville, Michigan. Impact Wrestling cameras will be on site as the Impact Global Championship is on the line, where the champion Eli Drake takes on Johnny Impact and Alberto El Patron. Tickets are still available, and much more information on the event can be found on Border City Wrestling's Facebook or at bordercitywrestling.com. Last week, we had Logan Stutz in the studio here for an interview on WinCity Sports, and the Windsor Express are going to be kicking off their season on the road this Saturday, and then their home opener next Saturday, November 25th, versus Halifax. In Lancers news, the only team at home this weekend is the Lancers men's hockey team. They're going to have games at the South Windsor Arena on Friday night versus Ryerson and Saturday night versus York. And that's going to be all for WinCity Sports this week. Be sure to check us out on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, WePodcast site and app, and on cjam.ca. So until next week, smell you later.